Yes, welcome back. My name is James. Yeah, Element is not sweet. One interesting thing this morning is our customers complained of our applications. One customer said she was trying to click on the load recipe, the button was responding. One of the customers said the application just crashed, it stopped. But our application really didn't crash. It was waiting for something, data. Imagine for a second, this French pan here. I put in some burger, and probably it's gonna take some 5 minutes. So, ask the chef here, am I gonna wait for 5 minutes? No, probably I have to chop some onions and probably maybe do some dishes while the burger is cooking. But if I decide to wait, probably the head chef might fire me. Instead of just waiting while the burger is cooking, I can be doing other tasks. And that's exactly what the Kotlin Coroutines solves in mobile applications. So think of your applications as the chef. It needs to fetch data from the internet. While the data is happening, it needs to be updating the operating system or maybe writing data to the database. That just doesn't happen instantly. It takes some time. But with the Kotlin Coroutines, it allows you to run tasks in the background or suspend some tasks while waiting for the results. We'll talk about something called the viewModelScope and the launch. This makes sure that our UI doesn't freeze, so that customers doesn't have to click a button 5 times thinking the application is frozen while a task is happening in the background. It's just the same thing. Our customers doesn't have to wait at the counter while the burger is cooking. We can be cooking the fries, we can be cooking pasta or pizza and take the orders to our customers. They don't have to wait here, but in the end, they're going to receive the results. That's something interesting about coroutines, and that's why we are here to solve the problem of waiting. Launch, fire, and forget. So just start your task and ask for the customer to wait. That's where Kotlin Coroutines brings in the power. So your UI or the main thread doesn't have to freeze because you are running one task and waiting for the results. No, that's not Android. Coroutines might sound a little bit confusing, but here's the thing. You don't have to memorize the syntax. In this episode, we want to understand everything behind the coroutines. Think of coroutines as just our kitchen. We have an app, we have a kitchen. Some orders from our customers would take time. Some would take a minute and some will need more time. But the goal is to make sure that our kitchen is running, our application is running, and at no instant should our kitchen stop functional because the burger is cooking, and our application should not stop because we are fetching data or updating our database. So join me in this Android series of understanding what coroutines are. And get ready, because our kitchen and our app is not stopping. So welcome back. Now, we're going to create a new Android Studio project, and we will be following the packages. So we want to follow the MVVM architecture, where we have the model, view model, the data, the repository layers. So we're just going to clean up this up later on. But first, I would want us to build our screen here. So I'm going to create a new package. Let's call it screens. Inside this screen, I want us to create our recipe screen. So recipe screen. So remember, the application we're creating is the recipe. So the thing is, once the user has opened the applications, so we should be able to load the recipe on the phone. So that means we have to at least use the network request to make a delay of around 2-3 seconds. But now, for now, we don't have we don't need to make network requests. So we will be using fake repository and suspension to allow us to make that call. So don't worry about suspension. We will get to understand that later. So for now, we're going to create simple composable screen. So we can say recipe screen. And yeah, we can enable our preview. So we can add preview. And then composable that we want to preview, that will be the recipe screen preview. Then we can call, of course, the recipe screen. So for this, I'm just going to close this for now. We want to display what really happens on this screen when we are building our screen here. So we're going to add a simple column. To this column, we'll take in a modifier, and we're going to say this modifier. So I'm rushing through because these are basic stuff we've worked through in the previous series. So you can check out the Android series. So modifier.fill max size. So for our preview, we want to allow background so that we're able to see what is really happening here. So I'm just gonna do that, show background to true. And then we've made our modifier to fill max size. So that is it for now. So for this column, we're gonna have a button to allow our users, not the widget button, sorry, the button from Compose. So for on click for now, it's gonna remain that way. And for our text, not that kind of text. For our text, of course, material 3, we're gonna say load recipe. Yes, we are done for now. So what we can do is we can try and center this content. So I'm just gonna build and refresh this. So what we're going to do now is we want to make sure that we have vertically arranged these guys. So vertical arrangement is arrangement dot center, and then horizontal alignment, we want to align it to the center horizontally. Yes, as you can see, we now have our preview here. So we will do the screen configurations later. Now, back to our packaging here is, remember, for the recipe has an ID and it has a name. So we're going to create another package and call it the model. So we're gonna have the model here. And then inside the model package, we are going to create a data class. So this data class will hold the specifications of each recipe. So be it the name or the price or maybe the ID. So we're going to call it a recipe for now. And in this recipe, so we're going to take in ID of type int. So we can leave it as an integer for now. We're going to take in name of the recipe for now as a string. So we are done with this. So this ideally will help us in the UI when we need to display this kind of data through the ViewModel. So remember, in Android, under the good architecture, it means we have state in the UI, and events flow up and state goes down. So the ViewModel will help us expose this data to the UI through this. Now, let's go create now our repository layer for now. So we're going to say repository. Inside this repository, so create a new, actually it's an interface. So remember, one thing about interfaces is it's a contract. So think of it this way. You are building an application using maybe retrofit for your network calls. And now you need to switch to maybe a library like Ktor. So you don't need to remodify your contracts. So they will remain intact. So that's why with interfaces, you need to create implementation classes. So that's why we ideally have the interfaces. So we will call this one recipe repository. And for this, we will create one function that is going to fetch the recipe. So we're going to say function get recipe. Now, this function of ours returns a list of the recipe. And we are done. Now, remember we talked about this is just a contract. So we need an implementation of these guys. So we need to create a class. Remember we said we were just going to create a fake network request. So we're going to say fake repository. So let's call it fake repository implementation. Yes. And then this will need now to implement our recipe repository. So if you over your mouse here, it says it needs to implement these guys. So we're going to say just an override this guy here. So we don't need this to do for now. So we need to fake a network delay. So for this case, we're going to use delay. So delay ideally will delay, like it will gonna take some time before it processes any code block inside that function. So for now, we want to say we want to delay this network request for maybe 3 seconds. So we have it that way. But if you over your mouse here, it says make get recipe suspend. So what is a suspend? So remember, suspending means pausing and resuming later. So you can suspend an event, you can suspend someone can go home, you can suspend your chef ideally because of misbehavior in the kitchen or in the bakery. And that ideally, that chef can resume back. some other times in the future. With suspend function, it means you're able to pause and resume the execution of that code block later on in time. So you don't have to wait for the results of that function. So that's why we need to make our function suspend. So we come back here and say suspend. So this means with suspend functions, we will later on learn about something in coroutines called launch. It's fire and forget. So in short, it's a small fire and forget. So that means I've given you a task. I'm not going to wait for that result. I will continue working on other items. That is suspend. Now, remember again, we said, now there's another problem here. I want you to read this statement here. It says, suspend function delay can only be called from a coroutine or another suspend functions. So one interesting thing about coroutines and suspend functions is you can only call a suspend function inside another suspend function or a coroutine. So that means we also need to make this function of ours suspend. Let's see what will happen. Yes, and now the error is gone. So for delay, we can just say in milliseconds. Now we have one small problem here. It says add a return statement, because in our function here, what we're trying to say is return a list of recipes here. So we're going to say now that we are done. So ideally this would be a whole entire network call being made. So once we've done with the network calls, we can now say return. Just return a list of few recipe items. So we can return. You can say recipe 1. Let's say pizza. Yes, I'm gonna duplicate this. Actually, it should be pizza this way. The other one we can say is a burger, and then maybe something like pasta. So ID 2 and ID 3. So ideally, we are technically done with our repository layer. So this is everything you need to do in your repository layer for now, because we are just using we're just mocking the network call. So that's why we need to do this. So just remember, a suspend function is a function that can be called within other suspend functions or a coroutine. And it means the execution of this function or the execution of this code block can be paused and resumed later on. Yeah, that's one thing, interesting thing about suspend. It means in Android, we have main thread. So the main thread updates the UI. So it means with suspend functions, you don't block the main thread. So that means the application, it doesn't call something called ANR, application not responding. Sometimes when you're running your application, you will face a problem where your app crashes or it says application not responding. So with suspend functions, that is what ideally it does. So it helps you to avoid your Android application causing that problem to your mobile device. Now, the next thing once we've done here is setting up the ViewModel. So I would want to put a ViewModel just within the screens here. So it helps it have cleaner architecture. So we're going to say recipe ViewModel. Ideally, it's a class, so it needs to extend ViewModel. Now, with ViewModel, we need to inject our repository inside this here. So we can have a private val recipe repository and the repository. So this allows us to access this method here. So we need it helps us to access this, which returns a list of recipes, which ideally we've made a fake network call to return this kind of list here. So for now, I will later on explain to you something about threads here. So we would want to understand how does a suspend function makes it achievable to make sure that your UI or the main thread is cleaner and it only needs to render data from the ViewModel directly in clean way. And we have something called threads. So we will come back to the thread later on. So back to our ViewModel. So once we've injected this, we need to keep track of how we are loading our recipe. So we can have a state where we say whether its loading is true or false, so that we can show probably a circular progress indicating bar. And we need a state to observe the results. So one thing about state in Android is we're able to observe. So it means we are observing for changes. So if our data changes, probably from the repository or the local storage, maybe room database. So we need to update the UI and say, hey, can you render this data? Can you recompose your composables to show this kind of screen? So that is why we need state to observe this. So remember again, ViewModel doesn't need to know where all this kind of data is coming from. It only needs to tell the UI, hey, the data has changed, through the state that the data has changed. You need to update your values to this kind of values. So with that, we're going to create two states. So variable, let's say it's loading by mutable state of false. So we're gonna start with a state of so import that. So we're gonna start. So what I was just doing is option enter. So ideally, if you hover your mouse here, it will tell you to import the get and set values. Just clean that up and also the other one. So we're going to create another variable. So to hold and update our results from our own repository here. So we're going to say by mutable. Okay, we have another one here. So by mutable recipe. What am I doing? Mutable state of. So we're going to take in a list, and this list should be of recipe, and we're going to start off with an empty list for now. Yes. So ideally, we can just make these ones private sets. Gonna make it easier so that we're only able to expose and modify this within the same class. So private set. Yes. So we are done up to that point. Now, how do we access this data here? That is one problem we have. So how do we get this suspend function to return this kind of data? Ideally, what we can do for now is we can write our own normal function. So of course we know, so let's say function fetch recipe. Yes, that is it. So the thing is, we need to call the recipe repository and get to this method. How do we do that? So ideally, we can just say recipe repository dot get recipe. We have a problem. So it says make fetch recipe suspend. So remember what we said is if you command click here or control click this is a suspend function. And remember what we said is suspend functions can only be called from other suspend functions or a coroutine. So remember, a coroutine is just another block of code that can be suspended, can be posted, resumed later on, that can be suspended. So we need to make our function a suspend function. So it says it can only be called from a coroutine or another suspend function. So if you say here suspend, then the error is gone. But there is one problem. So remember, we need to keep track of the Android resources. We can't be making network calls when the user already left our applications. So we need to free these resources so that other applications can use these resources. So we're going to remove that for now and introduce something else called the viewModelScope. So the viewModelScope is just another coroutine that is specifically used within the viewModel that allows you to observe the life cycle of a coroutine that has been started. Ideally, starting a coroutine means launching a coroutine. So if you say viewModel, if you now say viewModelScope, just know that viewModel is a coroutine launch. We have started a coroutine here, and even if we kill our application now, as long as the application has been killed, the coroutine will also be killed because the viewModel has been killed. So it observes the life cycles of the Android applications. So we need to move this here, and you can see now the error is gone because we are calling this function here, which is a suspend function, inside a coroutine. So remember we said the suspend function can be called from another suspend function or a coroutine. So a viewModelScope is just another coroutine, and that observes the life cycles. And launch allows us to start a coroutine. So we're able to observe this coroutine. Now, later on, we will come to understand how do we make sure that we are catching errors in case we are making a network request and it's taking longer, or maybe the server is down. So we'll come to understand about error handling in coroutines. But for now, just understand that we are calling we are using viewModelScope, which is a coroutine inside to execute this suspend function. So we are done with setting up the viewModel. Now, let's go back to our UI and update these values. So if we go back to our screen, first thing we need to do is we need to inject the recipe viewModel here, recipe viewModel, and of course a comma here. And then we now need to create two variables of reference from our viewModel to the state. So we're going to say, we can actually have them as value because we're not going to change them. Val is loading equal to repository viewModel is loading. And then we're going to have another value for the recipe list, which is going to be the recipe viewModel dot recipe. And we are done with setting these guys up. Now, we need to update our UI. So we're going to say here, we can just remove this since we are done with the preview. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say, since we have a column, so let me just collapse these inputs here. Since we have a column here and we have a button. So we need to say, once you click on load, we need to display, we can just close this given we are done. And probably open our emulator. Now, given we have this, we're going to say here is, so we're going to say if is loading is true, okay, we forgot one thing. Let's go back to our viewModel. Now, once we've launched our coroutine, we need to update the UI. We were saying, as before we make this network call, we need to display something to the user so that the user doesn't think the application is frozen once he or she has clicked on the button. So we need to say, is loading to true. So we need to update this to a true, and then we need to change this, update it. Once we have the results from this network call, we can now say is loading can now be false. And we can store this in our recipe. And we are now done. So going back to our screen here, I'm going to say if it's loading, we just need to display a circular progress loading indicator. Else, we need to display this data in a column order. So we can directly use a lazy column. Lazy column allows us to do that. And we're going to say this is a recipe. We can just use a lambda, and then we can say items of type T generic, and then we're going to say now we can reference our recipe now here, and we're going to say we can just display our text actually, so we don't have to display our things. So you can say recipe dot, can reference this not here, cut this and paste it here. We can say recipe recipe dot name, and maybe just use horizontal divider, so that it can make it a little bit cleaner. Now we can now come back to our main activity and just clean this stuff up, remove this, and now we need to call our recipe screen here. So remember, our recipe screen is taking in viewModel. Given we haven't done anything on dependency injection, so we're just going to do that manually here. So I'm going to say var recipe viewModel. You're just going to say it's recipe viewModel. So remember, it takes in the repository, so we also need to create a variable for the repository, repository layer, and we're going to say recipe. Actually, it was our fake repository. I don't know why we called it the implementation. Then gonna pass in here. You can just have these as val, and then all of this one as val also. Yes. Then here inner padding will require a modifier of type. So we can just say modifier dot padding. Then we're gonna say inner padding, and we're gonna take in our viewModel, recipe viewModel here, and just a comma. And yeah, I think we're done. So we can run our application and see what will happen if the user decides to click on load the recipe. Yeah, the button is not responding because this one thing we have not done. Recipe screen on click. So on click, we need to call the recipe view model and say fetch recipe, and then just restart our application. And then you can see now it's loading and we have data displayed. Remember, we talked something about our threads. So let's just go back here. I want to show you something, or open logcat, just clear this. Now, delay observes the suspension. So remember, delay is a suspend function, and it runs on the main thread, yes, but it doesn't block the thread that is running on. Unlike threads, where you need to wait for the results. So that means, for example, if we say thread.sleep, we are still doing the same thing. Maybe just increase this time for now. I just want you to observe what will happen when we switch from delay as suspend function to the threads and click on this. So you can see nothing is happening within the screen. The screen is frozen and we don't know what's happening. You can see now Android applications isn't responding. The ANR we talked about. So if you come here to our code base, so you can see we are having a timeout of, in short, the running time of this application has exceeded what the main thread could have held. So that means it's going to kill the entire application so that it doesn't hold on to the resources of that could have been used and released and used by other applications. So with threads, it blocks the main thread. So that means the UI is not updated in any way possible. So it has to wait for the results of that. So we can now just close this and comment that. And don't use threads unless you are just using it for testing. So if you now run back our applications, we should be able to load and display the data. Yes, and we have the data. So that's basically implementation of coroutines on your mobile applications. So if you're new to coroutines, refer to our previous episodes where we talked about the coroutine basics. So it's going to help you understand how you implement coroutines on your mobile applications. So see you in our next episode of coroutines.